Medfield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health. SMS MedShield to 33023 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.
Dear Sir, my name is Noma India Zenzile. I'm a disabled woman, and this is my appeal. On behalf of blind people, deaf people, all people with disabilities, every day we are faced with many challenges. We are treated unfairly. But it can change. With new legislation, our lives will get better. So from all of us, I'm asking, please make South Africa accessible to all.
More than 1 billion people in the world live with some form of disability. According to Stats SA, the national disability prevalence rate in South Africa is 7.5%. Disability is said to be more prevalent among females and increases with age. Now, persons with severe disability experience difficulty in accessing education and employment opportunities, generally have poorer health, lower education achievements, fewer economic opportunities, and higher rates of poverty. Now, disability is not only a public issue, but is also a human rights and development issue. The National Day of Persons with Disabilities is celebrated annually on the 3rd of December. So today we discuss disabilities. We'll be joined in the studio by Director of Advocacy and Mainstreaming from the Department of Social Development, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, and 2 representatives from the National Council of and for People with Disabilities in South Africa, and both of them Casual Day ambassadors. Now, you can tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply just interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. So sit back, relax, and learn from this bumper show ahead. Coming to you just after a short break. I'm Dr. Salam Mutaung, and this is Health Talk.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est si bon.
Dose of art and entertainment news. Tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
Lydia Nemaponi has been a poultry farmer for 13 years. The 41-year-old employs 20 people, but she daily faces obstacles.
As you can see that I use a wheelchair, that sometimes I will need any assistance in our business. That means I must hire someone. And then you can see that we have a financial problem. That when I hire somebody, that means the money that I use, that I generate the income, that means I must split it.
Disabled entrepreneurs are part of the mainstream economy, but they lag behind with market competitiveness. They want government to help them with skills training and funds.
We have been thinking all the time that we are doing the right thing, but actually they've been raising issues that shows that we are actually going a different direction. Hence, we are saying let's get together and be able to develop a framework within which we should be able to operate as government in terms of assisting them.
Okay. The two-day summit will establish an organized chamber for people living with disability. Rutiano Bobodi for SABC News in Polokwane.
All right, so we're going to learn more about disabilities, and we're joined in our studio by our special guest. First up, closest to me, is Ndada Beni Padime, who's Director of Advocacy and Mainstreaming from the Department of Social Development. Welcome to Health Talk, Mr. Padime. All right, and then next to him is Philippa Jackson. Philippa is a physiotherapist in private practice based in Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk, Philippa.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Right, last but not least is Tuli Matlala. Tuli is Casual Day Ambassador from the National Council of and for People with Disabilities in South Africa. NCPDSA for short. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much. A pleasure being on your show.
All right. First, let's start from the basics. Perhaps let's start with you, Mr. Padime. When we talk disabilities, let's define what it is that we're talking about. What are disabilities?
Disability is an evolving concept, and it's by self-definition. It includes issues when persons with disabilities are discriminated against, but disability is imposed by society when it fails to uphold the rights and specific needs of such individuals. So that it may include also impairments that are recognized as sensory, intellectual, neurological, visual, and or otherwise, physical and so forth. So this is basically what happens. Okay. But remember that we're talking about all aspects of life. So we're looking at the rights and specific needs of individuals per se.
So it's quite a broad
it's fairly broad, but we define disability within the understanding of the social model, which says disability is not a health and welfare issue, but it is a human rights and developmental issue. And it is therefore defined within the rights perspective instead of services perspective only. Yes.
What is, Philip, the difference between impairment in a strictest terms, impairment and disability?
So the World Health Organization talks about impairment being the physical thing that causes the disability. So it's sometimes structural, like somebody might have a spinal cord injury, or they might have no vision, or they might be in extreme pain, which prevents them from doing things. And then there's the impairment, the inability to participate in what goes on in society because people can't access things. So, for instance, somebody in a wheelchair can't get upstairs, as we saw in the first clip. Somebody who's unable to hear will struggle to follow what's on the television unless they have particular adaptations made. And there are a whole range of things that would prevent people from participating in what goes on in society.
Yeah, but I mean, I could be cynical and say somebody who's shy and because of his or her shyness does not want to participate in any, let's call it, things that put someone on the spot, that's not necessarily a disability.
But that's an I don't want to as opposed to I cannot.
Right.
So there is quite a big difference there.
Right. Tuli, let's get you in here. Your thoughts on, because let's face it, there are people who society sees as being disabled, but they say, no, hang on, I don't have a disability. Your thoughts on that?
The reason why people would shy away from accepting their disabilities is purely from a stigma point of view. Just like my colleague here just explained, I'm a person with impairments. What is disabling me is my environment. That's where the disability aspect comes in. Because if we had a universally accessible world, which we're striving for, then my impairments wouldn't matter. then I would not be a person with a disability. But as we know, disability has always been stigmatized, especially in our Black communities, where it's seen as a whole lot of things like witchcraft. There's so many stereotypes around it. So as a result, people tend to think that if they are associated with disability, therefore they are looked down at, they're discriminated and all those type of things. But the moment people get to understand that it is the environment that disables us, not our impairments.
Let's stay on that a bit. I mean, you mentioned the issue of stigma. So what is the level of awareness, in society, with regards to, disabilities? And in other words, what is being done about this whole notion of the stigma, towards people with disabilities?
Okay. When it comes to issue of awareness, I think we have spoken, we have chanted, we've been out there, we've raised awareness. People are aware of disability. What we need to do now is educate even further, because people fear what they don't know. And that's exactly the reason why we're faced with behavioral and attitudinal barriers from society. But the moment that we move away from thinking that we need to raise awareness, then I think we'll be making a step forward, because now it's time to roll up the sleeves and say it's a human rights issue, just like Ndate Padime was saying. It is no longer a welfare issue. Disability has evolved from a charity model to now what we call a social model, which is the mainstreaming model. And with the mainstreaming model, it's about ensuring that people with disabilities are integrated in every aspect of life.
Okay. Philip, I'm going to come back to you and ask you to start talking about the different types. But before that, let me ask Ndate Padime, in terms of the statistics now, I mentioned in my intro that the general prevalence rate of disability is about 7.5%. Do we have actual figures of disabilities in South Africa? How true is that 7.5%?
Yeah, that 7.5% it's reached through community surveys, through census and so forth.
Yeah.
But remember that in the last one, we did not count children between the ages of 0 to 4 and people living in institutions. So our figures may be close to accurate, but not exact. But that's your 7.5%. You're looking at just over 3 million people. So that in itself. But if you take the overall figure, worldwide, it would be your 10% in total. If you take your overall figure, graphically speaking, yes.
Okay. And is there any, predominance, of any one particular type of disability? Because I mean, the 10% is overall, isn't that so?
It's overall, yes. Look, there's no predominantly specific people with impairments that are in the majority. The balance of scale differs from statistic to statistic. You understand? You might find that people with psychosocial, intellectual, mental disabilities are much more in terms of prevalence because of the different types of impairments in terms of psychosocial, mental, and intellectual.
Okay. So, Philippa, let's talk from your experience then. The different types that you deal with. Let's stay with the word impairment for now.
So obviously I work mostly with people who have physical disabilities, because physiotherapy is about physical means of working with people. But that doesn't limit us to people who have a spinal cord injury or a brain injury. Children who are blind from a very early age can't see other people moving. And so they can't see that toy over there that stimulates another child to want to go there, to move there. So children who are visually impaired often have abnormal movement patterns. Very often, sight is a very big stimulus, and very often those children develop a secondary autism because they don't have enough stimulus in their lives. Similarly, children with cerebral palsy, they're impaired from the level of the injury to their brain before the age of 4 or 5, depending on what literature you're reading. But they can develop a secondary disability because kiddies learn by moving. So the ability to crawl into, out of, under, around, over something is the beginning of your mathematical skills.
All right. Tuli, in the last 30 seconds, in my introduction, I said Casual Day Ambassador. What is that?
A Casual Day is the biggest fundraising initiative for people with disabilities, and it is a project of the National Council of and for People with Disabilities. The money is utilized to improve the lives of people living with disabilities. Right. We've got over 50 beneficiaries in terms of organizations and over 500 individuals that benefit from the project. Okay. Last year alone, we managed to raise about 28 million so that we can just...
So you don't need any more money, isn't it?
We do. Every year we do. So you buy your 10 Rand sticker and that's how you support. It's on the first Friday of every September.
All right, great stuff. Okay, let's just go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll try and understand, the causes and risk factors for disabilities. Please stay with us.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
We cross live, give updates and cover sport.
The observer missions, what are they saying?
It will be a very difficult announcement to make, to say whether these elections have been free and fair.
1 in every 100 people are diagnosed with arthritis daily. In an effort to raise awareness, a handful of elderly women, they took to the streets of Soweto to stretch their fight against the ailment.
Western Province upset the Sharks by 33 points to 21. We crowned the 2017 Currie Cup champions at the Kings Park Stadium
in Durban.
On time with weather every hour, all the time. For all news, stay tuned to AM News every Saturday and Sunday at 1000 hours Central African Time.
At MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
Welcome back. We're talking disabilities with my guest, Dr. Benny Padime, who is from the Department of Social Development, Philippa Jackson, a physiotherapist, and we're now joined by another special guest, and this time is Daphne Twala. Daphne is also a Casual Day Ambassador and also Nepiran Ambassador from the National Council of and for People with Disabilities. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you.
All right. Before I talk to Tuli, Daphne, let's just talk to you about, causes and risk factors, I suppose from a clinical, medical perspective now, and also based on your experience. What are the common, causes? I suppose we can start with children and, before we get to adults.
Okay, so some children are born disabled. Sometimes that is preventable.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we have quite a high percentage, I think, of birth injuries associated with women being left in labour too long and babies that are in distress not being delivered quickly enough, not accessing Caesars or whatever it is that is needed. Of course, anybody at any age can have an accident that causes a disability.
Yeah, let's stay with pregnancy a while. Well, during pregnancy, are there any specific issues that people perhaps may do or not do during pregnancy that may result in disabled children?
So, for example, Down syndrome can be detected early, and people who are older and pregnant or have or there's an older father, they can be tested for that and it can be identified. So we can have chromosomal abnormalities. We have children who develop spina bifida, which is also detectable early on in the pregnancy, if it's properly looked for.
So are there any particular type of ladies, you said older, At what age, as it were?
I think the risk factor is over 35.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the age is for men.
All right.
When conception takes place.
Right.
But it also, Down syndrome also occurs in women who have their children younger. I saw a child just recently where the mother was 23. So, you know, it really depends, and the testing is not difficult as I understand it, and really people should be offered that. Ultrasounds should determine, or should be able to pick up spina bifida or those kind of problems.
Right. And then, of course, there's issues around the birth process itself.
Yes.
Right.
And many children are deprived, well, mostly it's children who are deprived of oxygen during or before, or, you know, during the birth process often. Sometimes children develop, I've seen a child who developed jaundice and was not treated quickly enough and developed very severe brain damage as a result of not being managed for the jaundice. So there are a range of things that can happen. Infections in young childhood, or at any age really, where somebody gets meningitis or encephalitis, and that results in a brain.
Perhaps talking about infections, the obvious one that comes to mind is polio, because obviously some years ago we set on eliminating polio. How many of polio cases are you seeing in practice?
I've not seen an acute polio case.
Right.
What I see sometimes is what they call post-polio syndrome.
Right.
So in polio, the number of motor units, which is the nerve cell and the nerves that control the movement, become reduced. So many of those are killed, and then as the person ages, they learn to do things after the polio, but as they age, they stop being able to do some of those things, and the disability increases because those motor units become so worn out and damaged that they stop functioning.
All right. Definitely, let's come back to you before I speak to Dr. Padime here. Perhaps tell us more about yourself and your own disability. You were born like this.
Yes, I was born with a disability, so I have a physical disability.
Right.
The thing about my disability is that I'm limited to doing some things, but I can do most of the things. I can manage on my own. Like, for instance, I can take a bath on my own and such things. But however, I am limited when it comes to my hair. I can't do my own hair. I have to wait for somebody to do it. I only wear sneakers and boots because I can tie my own shoelaces. But if I had to wear sandals, I'll struggle for like an hour or even not get it at all on my right hand. So I prefer wearing the things that I know that I can be able to wear on my own.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously you've grown up like this. You've kind of developed what's normal for you and what helps you get around.
Actually, I don't even know what's not normal.
Right.
The thing is, when growing up with a disability, you know that people will look at you or will stare at you. In my case, wherever I go, people stare at me. However, I don't have a problem with it because I define myself as 4 fingers short. So whenever people ask me, what's your name, I'll say I'm 4 fingers short. And it's like they take offense for me. But then I say, hello, I'm the one who's injured, but you're the one doing the limping for me. So it's just to create awareness in such a way that, yes, I am 4 fingers short, but it doesn't mean that I cannot do what you people without disabilities cannot do.
So tell us about Nepi Day or Nepi Run Ambassador. What does that involve?
Nepi Run is the children's program of the National Council of and for Persons with Disabilities. So it's an event where we collect nappies for children with disabilities. So it happens every first Saturday of November each year.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's come back to you, Dr. Padim.
Yes.
In terms of, now, I mean, obviously we're focusing on causes and risk factors. In terms of policy and legislation, is it more geared towards people already with disabilities, or how much of it goes towards prevention, if one could put it that way?
Well, look, when we write disability rights law and policy, we base it on 3 aspects. Firstly is the principle of natural justice, which is your audi ultra partem. Secondly, it's the legal framework which is based on jurisprudence, and that's case law that we refer back to.
Yeah.
And the third one is the rule of law. So in that case, it then forces you legally to include preventative aspects within your approach, so that you prevent persons from having disabilities by inspiring and enforcing the laws that prevents accidents. Right? Like you don't drive drunk. Because there's a dolus eventualis principle that applies there.
There's the word again, dolus eventualis.
Yes. If you go and drive drunk, knowing fully well that you are going to cause an accident, it's dolus eventualis.
Yeah.
So we look at those things. In terms of jurisprudence, we look at case law that says, how did our courts rule in certain aspects? But remember, in our legal terms, when we write policy and law in disability, we look at what's called participatory democracy. And those are the main principles. Non-discrimination, obviously, it's a big one. Equality, and those are the principles, is a big one. Universal access and design is a big one. Accessibility is a big one. And all those principles that I'm mentioning must apply to every law that is written in this country. So that's from your constitutional mandate.
So in terms of what Felipe was saying around issues around pregnancy, any policy issues around there?
Well, that's basically the responsibility of our Department of Health. But we assist in advising in terms of saying, with regard to preventative measures, obviously, the issues of maternal care is very important. The prenatal aspects, those are regulated by the Department of Health, but we provide technical support there. Yes.
Well, Philippa, thank you so much for your time. We have to say, unfortunately, goodbye for now.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, we now start talking about, getting a sense of what it is like to live with a disability. Please stay with us.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill. We'll help you stay well.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est si bon.
MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
I'm a rap artist. I have muscular dystrophy. What it does is it weakens my voluntary muscles, which is my biceps, triceps, calves, and etc. And thereafter, it affects my involuntary muscles, which is my lungs, heart, kidneys, blood, and so on. I was diagnosed with it when I was 2 years old, and doctor said I wouldn't live up to the age of 4, and this year I'm turning 33. Today, we'll be going on a journey to see the accessibility with disability in transport. Ah, the canvas. Let's check. Oh, no space. Draai me om, bro. Draai me om. I need help. Pick and pay. I need help to be picked up.
No, is it actually space here, you know?
It's too small.
Block, sir.
Yeah.
It's blocked.
No, I can't. Yeah, it's alright, oh.
It's alright.
Yeah,
it's alright, yeah, you can hear me. Thank you.
Welcome back. So there's obviously issues with, people with disabilities that they experience on a day-to-day basis. We're going to learn more about that. I'm with our guests, Benny Padime from the Department of Social Development, and we still have Tulima Tlala, Casual Day Ambassador from the National Council of and for People with Disabilities, and we're now joined by Cindy Kashula, who is an occupational therapist in private practice in Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk, Cindy.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Perhaps let's start with you, Tuli. We're saying living with a disability, what it is like. Perhaps take us through your own personal story.
Okay, I acquired my disability when I was 15 years old. I was a teenager and obviously being very hyperactive as a child. And in just one instant, my mobility was gone. And I had to adjust from a hyperactive child that had no disability to a child now that has a disability.
Yeah.
Coming from a small township.
Do you mind telling us what happened?
Oh, okay. I love telling my story.
Yeah.
So we were at a school function. I'm from a small township called Ekangala, just outside of Bronkhorstspruit. So we had a school function there. We're crowning the queen for that year. And while we're outside waiting for the show to get started, some guys that are actually not from our school started fighting and shooting at each other, and I was hit by a stray bullet. And that bullet rendered me paraplegic since then, 1995. Went through my left breast, hit the lung, diaphragm, and liver, then went to the spine. And that was the end of my mobility.
Do you know what level of the spine?
My lesion is I'm a T10, T11. I'm between T10 and T11. Yeah, so I had to adapt, and it was difficult because even the school that I was attending at that time was totally inaccessible. And I was fortunate because the learners there were very compassionate, and they volunteered to assist me getting around, going home. I wasn't able to use the bathroom at school. It was totally inaccessible. So it was a very big struggle. And sadly, even after completing my matric, going to varsity was the same challenge. And up until I got an opportunity to go study in Denmark, which is where I learned how people with disabilities in first world countries operate. It is pure bliss, total bliss.
Tell us the differences, between what you experienced in Denmark and what we have in this country.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, the institution that I was at is it's integrated. It's both people with and without disabilities. And it's total independent living for people with disabilities, because I had my own room, and going to the mall or to my classes, I had accessible transport that would pick me up at a certain time. And the stigma isn't as heavy as it is here at home. And also discrimination, you don't experience it much. And I would like to believe that they don't have as many people with disabilities as we do here. But the difference is that they're visible in the first world countries because it is easy for them to move around. Accessibility is not an issue. So that was the difference that I felt. And when it comes to generally talking about disabilities and employment opportunities, it is a day-to-day conversation which they have. I think they post an era where they have to sit down and try to think, how do we go about integrating people with disabilities? It has become a norm. So those are the best practices that we had to bring back home to say, how do we now try to adjust? But sadly, it was back in those days where disabilities was totally unheard of. And coming back, I had to accept a job as a call center agent because nobody would give me employment. And only now when people are looking at compliancy issues and they employ people with disabilities purely because they want to meet their targets, their numbers, and they're looking at the scorecard. Only now people are going out there and recruiting people with disabilities. But what needs to be understood is that people with disabilities need to be integrated, not for number purposes, but because they've got every right
to be there,
to be employed and to have a life just like anybody else.
Obviously, we're talking about, and looking at the issues that she's brought, and you've been involved in the realm of disabilities, if I can put it that way, for many years.
Many years.
Looking back and where we are now, how's that journey?
Look, I think we've made phenomenal progress starting from that time, because when we started with processes of drawing up the Disability Rights Charter, working on the United Nations Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities, going into working, into the RDP document, the disability aspects, going through the process of writing up the Integrated National Disability Strategy, working throughout the convention, on the rights of persons with disabilities. So it's been a long journey. And up to this point, we've got what we call the White Paper on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We've got positive laws, as I've said. There are specific sections that are within the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, regulations within the Employment Equity Act, the Labor Relations Act, the Mental Health Care Act. Of course, it needs to be amended here and there because of recent developments, as you know, with the Life as a Dimeni tragedy. It's a whole number of gamuts of acts that exist that actually ties up matters around disability. And what we are moving towards is to develop the frameworks, national frameworks that would go into regulations. And this will come out of the unfolding processes of the White Paper on the rights of persons with disabilities.
Right. Let's invite some comment from Cindy. Cindy, I mean, obviously in your world of occupational therapy, you at the latter end of the scale, so to say, you see people that obviously you offer services to. First of all, I'd like you to tell us about what you do for people with disabilities and what your view is in terms of access to healthcare services for people with disabilities.
So from an occupational therapist point of view, we try to focus on getting the person back to the level of function where they would like to be. Starting with a basic level where before you even look at employment, you have to be able to wash and dress and groom yourself. Because if you don't have that, you're not socially appropriate and employment is not even an option. So from an OT, we started at a very primary level to get the person able and independent as much as possible, where they are able to engage in an environment where they want to be. Then also from there, then if they have the ability to do that, then we want to look at reintegrating them into a social environment, getting them into their communities, looking at employment, looking at fulfilling their roles, because what we're seeing is many times, especially in role shifting. So if it's an elder person, which is a family member, they will have an injury and then they will lose their role as a father or as an employer or employee, and then you see a whole role shifting in the family. So we tend to be very involved in the social and the psychological part of also coping with what is the new normal.
All right, okay. So it's not only about integrating them back into society, but also you do some form of improving functionality in terms of, level of impairment. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely.
Right.
And when you think about function, it's not just the physical disabilities that we have to look at. We also need to consider the cognitive difficulties some people have. For example, brain injuries is where they would look perfectly fine and they would walk into a work setting and people won't even know until you sit them down and give them a task, and they are unable to work under the pressure. They are unable to fulfill the needs of the employer.
Yeah.
And that's where it's so difficult for people if you can't to explain if you can't see the disability. And I think that's where the awareness comes in, that it's not always what you see, it's sometimes deep inside.
So lastly, just in terms of access now, obviously they come to you because they have access to you.
Yes.
Do you do it the other way around? Do you go to those that don't have access to you? Or can you give me a comment just in terms of access to healthcare services?
Yes. So occupational therapists are very privileged to be part of the community service project. So we are involving communities. Unfortunately, we never have enough services to give. And it is an extreme need to get to the people in the communities. What we are seeing is they don't have the facilities to necessarily come to the healthcare facility. And whether it's transport or finances or just lack of knowledge that there are services that you can come to. So we do reach out as far as we can, but we are limited in our services.
Okay. Tuli, we're running seriously out of time, but I'd like you in the last 30 seconds or so, just give us your sense of where we are now, what you'd like to see happen. We have about a minute, it's fine.
Okay. As Dr. Padima has spoken, that in terms of legislature, we've come a long way.
Right.
I'd like just to emphasize on that, to say that we're doing quite well as a country in terms of integrating people with disabilities. And my message out there really would just be that disability does not mean inability. I had my injury when I was 15. I'm a mother. I'm a businesswoman. I drive my own car. I've got a very fulfilling life.
Right.
And the moment we change the mindset in terms of how we perceive people with disabilities, then we'll all be holding hands singing Kumbaya.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
How I wish we could start singing that song now. Wow. Tuli Matlala, Casual Day Ambassador from NCPDSA. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
All right,
having
folks.
me.
Time for another quick break. When we come back, we talk about, we continue our discussion on living with disabilities, but this time more from a child's perspective. Please stay with us.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
With the ANC's elective conference just days away, we take a look at the state of party politics in Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State. Will Mpumalanga be the kingmakers they claim to be? Can we expect the newly elected leader to end political killings in KZN? Join me, Aldrin St-Pierre, on this special assignment, Monday, 9 o'clock in the evening, Channel 404.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
Welcome back. We're talking disabilities with my guest, Benny Padima, Director of Advocacy and Mainstreaming from the Department of Social Development. We still have Cindy Kashula, occupational therapist in private practice in Joburg. And we have back Daphne Twala, Casual Day and Nappy Day ambassador from the National Council of and for People with Disabilities in South Africa. All right, so let's focus for now on children. All right, definitely we started earlier talking to you about your experiences, all right, as a child. Maybe if you could just cast your mind a little back to when you were a child with disabilities. Just give us a sense again of how you were able to socialize with other children and so on. Can you just give us a perspective on that quickly?
No problem. One thing I remember about being a child is that my mother fought for me to be in school.
Right.
So that's the first thing that comes in mind, but look at me now. So teachers were like, no, this child won't be able to write. How is she going to write? But my mother was like, you haven't even given her a chance. So how can you say that she won't be able to write? So from that day, I realized that it's actually about how I present myself, how I carry myself to the world. So it was really not easy being a child with a disability, because wherever I went, children will be like, no, we don't want to play with this child because we might get disabilities too. But then it was just some lack of, I think they were just ignorant because there were no campaigns revolving around disability to teach other children without disabilities how to treat children with disabilities. I remember when I was still growing up, I came across this other 4-year-old who asked me, why do I have a disability? Why do I have 6 fingers? Why don't I have 10 fingers like other kids? And then it was for me to explain him in a medical way. I knew he wouldn't get why I have a disability.
Right.
So I am a poet. So I used a poetical way to explain to the child why I have a disability. So I said to him that one day when God was designing me, Satan ran away with the rubber. So instead of God running after Satan, he just said to him, you know what, you shall see my power through the 4 fingers short child. Yeah. And then he just put me on earth. So I feel like I'm here to teach people that it doesn't matter how you look like, it doesn't matter who you are. What matters is the purpose that you serve here on earth. So I did a lot of things which seems impossible for kids like myself. I did backflips when I was still a child, which seems impossible. But I played a lot with my brother, who taught me all the things that people thought I couldn't do. So it just depended, it just revolved around the people I was with and how they carried me as a person.
Okay. So I suppose, Mr. Padima, just coming back to you, I understand, I mean, you're more from a policy and legislation,
That's right.
View. But when it comes to children with disabilities, some of them need, specific child care centers. Would you say that we have adequate centers around the country to take care of this need?
Look, I wouldn't say it's absolutely adequate, but the Department of Social Development has got an early childhood development policy. And the Department of Basic Education, and both departments work together to get children with disabilities into ECD centers that are inclusive. You see what I'm saying? So that they can access education right from scratch. So remember, the principle is to move from institutionalization. And that's a legal principle. It's international. We're instructed by the convention that we should not institutionalize people. We should integrate them as part of community life, but also make sure that they are included within the normal realm of life. So the Children's Act applies to children with disabilities, and we base that from Article 24 of the rights on Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and Article 23 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, the Children's Act is very clear that children with disabilities must be included within society. They must access education right from scratch, from where a child accesses education. So that in itself, and also the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities accommodates children specifically as part of a life. Article 6 and 7 would look at women and children with disabilities specifically within the convention. So you see, because we are a part of the international world, we are bound by international law of all those aspects of the conventions that I've mentioned to cater for children with disabilities.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Coming back to Cindy, I mean, we've heard the wonderful story, very inspiring, you know, what Daphne shared with us. Now, in terms of children and the needs, medical needs now of children, obviously, with disabilities, just take us through that aspect.
So I think what we have to consider is that their needs change. So from early on, if they were born in that way, their needs will change as soon as they go to school. Then they become a teenager. Then it becomes about how they look, what do they wear. It's not just a wheelchair. One of my clients wants a yellow wheelchair. So we have to take their needs into consideration, that it continuously changes. And we need to think about the financial implications. And I think that is something that is a big barrier at the moment. Because it's not just getting them physically able to partake in play and friendships and community events, but it's also in getting them involved in education, getting them involved in courses that they would like to do. So it's really about specific clients and what they want. And
okay, so understanding, I mean, what you do for the children in terms of, you know, helping them out in terms of, you know, improving functionality and levels of impairment. Are there issues that you teach parents to do at home to help children with disabilities?
Yes, we get absolutely amazing parents that are so willing to assist and to motivate their kids and to really enable them. As Daphne said, it's many times the family who support them through this, and then at the end of the time they reach their potential that they never thought they would. So yes, we give homework tasks, we communicate with the family about how to get this child involved as normal as possible.
Okay. Definitely from a council's point of view, what activities do you do that are geared towards, you know, children with disabilities?
We have the children's program, the one that I spoke about, the Nappy Run.
Yes.
So the Nappy Run focuses on children with disabilities. Most of them, they use nappies for a longer time than a normal kid. So most of the time, we do campaigns revolving around that. So we distribute nappies to different parents with children with disabilities, so it helps them a lot too, because nappies are really expensive. So we help them with that.
All right. Well, this has been such a fascinating discussion that requires a lot more time than we have, but unfortunately that's all the time we have. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for your contribution. Well, that was our special guest, Benny Padime from the Department of Social Development, and Cindy Kashula, occupational therapist, or we just call them OTs, you know, who's in private practice in Johannesburg, and of course Daphne Twala, Casual Day Ambassador from the National Council for people with disabilities in South Africa. Well, folks, that's all we have for you today, and thank you so much for staying with us and watching this program, and we're always appreciative of all the tweets that you send us, and otherwise, you know, we see you again next week, same time, same place. And if you've missed any of our shows previously, you can download them on YouTube. I'm Dr. Solomon Daung. Please do take care.